Yes. You see, while you were having the time of your life last weekend in Vegas and partying and getting caked on and all that wonderful stuff, some of us took our job seriously. And some of us did a little bit of research.
And now the Uncut Podcast presented by Joe and Theo.
Hello, everybody, and I'm currently stretching like a cat. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Uncut Podcast, everybody. And as maybe you can already tell, kind of like of my tone of my voice, this is going to be a slightly light-hearted episode. We're back. I'm back from a good vacation in Vegas. I know it's been a little longer before we got this episode out, but I'm going to blame myself for that before Joe blames me. And on this episode, everybody, we kind of have a bit of a topic that's a little more close to home for both me and Joe. Both me and Joe studied economics and finance, respectively, in university. And we kind of started talking, especially with the bridge collapse that occurred a couple of weeks ago that kind of stunned the global media. We kind of started talking about, how cities and countries essentially affect people's lives and what are the factors that are kind of being looked at to make a city or a country give its citizens a good quality of life. So what are the factors that affect a good quality of life? And that got us talking, and that's when we came up with the idea, hey, let's talk about that. And not only that, let's relate it to this phenomenal God-given province that we live in called Quebec. If you haven't already noticed by the tone of my sarcastic voice right there, this is going to be an enormous therapy session for me because I have a lot to say on Quebec. Therefore, sit back, enjoy the show as always. My name is Theo, and as always, the man on the other side of the mic is Joe, my lovely co-host. Joe, my good friend, how are you?
Well, for starters, thank you for that phenomenal introduction. Just take up all our time. Don't even let me speak. That's fantastic. Uh, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Glad to know you're back from Vegas. And you're in good spirits, a little bit with a rustic voice, but always good to have you back on the other end of this microphone. So yeah, today we are going to be having a little bit of a discussion about quality of life, and obviously with the relation to Quebec. And so, without further ado, Theo, let's get into it.
Exactly. Thank you. And let's jump straight into it. And as always, this is going to be really a two-part, right? First, both me and Joe kind of want to bring everybody on the same page, kind of talk broadly what major, organizations like the World Trade Organization, the IMF, major statistical organizations, what are the factors that they look at in terms of quality of life? Because the reality is that quality of life is somewhat subjective. So it is something that's good for someone is bad for someone else. But there are some objective measures and some objective criteria that these organizations look at in order to come up with somewhat of a score to rate countries in terms of greatest standard of living or the worst standard of living on the planet. And that's kind of where we want to take the conversation before my therapy session for Quebec starts. We want to essentially bring in everybody on the same page, discuss the general subjects, and kind of give examples to justify why these organizations are looking specifically at these, at these metrics. So through our research, the things that kind of stand out and that everybody kind of can quickly know when we talk about quality of living are pretty much like self-explanatory. The first and the major one is health. We're talking about not only, the healthcare system, but we're also talking about the mental health of its citizens and the spiritual health of its citizens. Now, when we're talking about mental health, it does kind of involve itself and combine itself with areas like the environment that you're surrounded in, your surroundings. Do you live in a pretty city? Is the weather gloomy? Do you have enough infrastructure there to help with mental health? Spiritual health on the other side is, does it allow you to practice your religion freely? Does it allow you to practice your spirituality with God freely, or does it impede that? Of course, other things that go into that, work environment. How good is the work environment that you're in? Do you have plentiful job? Are the jobs that you have good in salary? Salary is a big one. Income. How much income are you making? Do you have strong purchasing power? That I know, Joe, you did a lot of research and we're going to talk about very shortly. Talking on that purchasing power, freedom. Purchasing power, if you have a lot of freedom, if you have a lot of purchasing power, you get a lot of freedom and a lot of autonomy. So all of these, education and safety, is another two very, very big ones that we look at. So all of these are kind of, they jump out at everyone who discusses the subject. But I think through our research, and I think it's very funny that these kind of stood out to us, is some lesser so that are extremely important for quality of living that we wouldn't think about, right? So, for example, commute. If you're taking, if you have a decent job, let's say, but it takes you an hour and a half to get to that job in the morning, and it's a pain in the ass to get there because half the highways are clogged in traffic, wink, wink, Quebec, thank you very much, right? I'm already starting to make the parallels. Your commute isn't going to be that happy, right? You're going to be spending time away from your family. It's going to be a hassle. You're going to have to wake up an hour and a half earlier because everybody's waking up an hour and a half earlier because the fucking transit system has gone to shit, all that. So commute is actually very important, and we didn't think about that. Physical surroundings. Another thing is the city you live in beautiful, right? There's actually studies being done, and there's actually studies that have been done that have shown that happiness of the citizens correlates with the beauty of the city. More beautiful the city, more beautiful the architecture, the happier the citizens are, right? And also access to cultural and leisure activities. Obviously, if you have a lot of leisure activities, you have more things to do on your time off to enjoy your time within the city as opposed to another one. So these are, broadly speaking, the major things that organizations, statistical organizations across the world look at to rank different countries. And now I know, Joe, you're itching to start this little game with me. Is you really want to start kind of, and it's also going to be great for our audience to kind of see how these things come into play. But I know you have a lot of statistics from a lovely website, which ranks the top countries in practically almost every single one of these categories.
Yes. You see, while you were having the time of your life last weekend in Vegas and partying and getting caked on and all that wonderful stuff, some of us took our job seriously. And some of us did a little bit of research. Yes. You see, while you were having the time of your life last weekend in Vegas and partying and getting caked on and all that wonderful stuff, some of us took our job seriously. And some of us did a little bit of research. Europa, I think was one of them you named. All
Yeah.
fantastic sources. I went to Numbio, so take that for what it is. So, Theo, just prior to getting started here and having this conversation with you, I want to ask you a quick question, if I may.
Oh, okay. This is turning into Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Theodore Michael as the contestant.
No, it's turning into Family Feud and guessing the top five. I'm your host, Steve Harvey, just, without a mustache. So, Theo, for you, after all those sources you named, after all the different aspects that go into being a very high quality of life country, for you, what do you believe are the top five countries with the highest quality of life, according to Numbio?
Well, I'll start first and foremost by saying the continent that I think these countries are kind of sectioned at, I would think is in Europe, not in North America for the most part, right? Because North America has a lot of variety. There's some cities that are amazing, and there's some cities that are complete shit. And that kind of does balance out and brings the average down in terms of a country. Again, we're talking countries here. So I would tend to say Europe, and I would tend to say also the Nordic countries in Europe. So Finland, Norway should be in there. Denmark should be in there. There's the infamous one and the fantastic one that everybody wants to go to, which is Luxembourg. So I'm assuming that. So yeah, I would tend to say those are the top contenders.
So, yes. So, number one on the list is Luxembourg. And I would say Luxembourg by
Yes.
a very high margin of quality of
Right.
life.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the statistics now. They have about a 10-point lead over second place Netherlands,
Mhm.
followed by Iceland, Denmark, and Finland to round out the top five. Now, the top, so Luxembourg leads the most, okay, with 207.3 on the quality of life index. After that, I would say the Netherlands, Iceland, Denmark, and Finland are all very interchangeable. They're
Mhm.
all very much grouped into the same category. Like the spread between Netherlands and Luxembourg is the same spread between Netherlands and Finland. So they're
Right.
all very gapped. So it's good to see. And just to go off a little bit of what you were talking about, bringing into purchasing power, the healthcare index, cost of living, property prices, traffic commutes, all these type of things. It's interesting when you go look into that a little bit more. So us having that economic background, we could talk a little bit about the purchasing power of a country. So I don't know. Do you know what a purchasing power is?
Well, of course, purchasing power is the ability for the single dollar that the person is making to buy goods and services.
Yeah,
But to make it simple for the people that don't do economics, it's simply how much can you buy with a salary, the average salary you're making in the country.
yeah,
That's it.
and usually in relation to another country as your base. So for Numbeo, they take New York City as their base. So anything over 1% or anything over 100 means that country has a higher purchasing power than the base that it's set at. So
Right,
New York would have a purchasing power of 1 in comparison. Anything
right,
lower than 1 would mean they have less of a purchasing power than the city of New York. Anything higher than a 1 would mean they have a larger purchasing power than the city of New York,
right.
to get an idea for everybody out there. So when we go over these numbers, you have somewhat of a concept of what we're talking about. So number 1 on our list for the highest purchasing power goes to Luxembourg. That's ranked number 1. 148.9. So on average, they can have 50% more goods with the income they make than somebody living in New York City. Number 2 and number 7 internationally is Iceland at 109.1. Number 3, the Netherlands, number 9 internationally at 103.3. Denmark, 103 flat, 10th internationally. And Finland at 15th at 97.5. So Finland, obviously the population could afford just slightly less than what the base currency set at. In this case, again, the city of New York. So it goes to show you that even citizens in Luxembourg, the highest quality of life possible, again, according to Numbeo, have very high purchasing powers, means their salary goes a long way in being able to afford everyday goods, everyday services, which is very phenomenal on that. And so, Theo, I'm going to turn it back to you before we go into the other categories.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add to that? Anything maybe you want to say? Anything that you know you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, well, from my research also, and kind of what I know and what I've heard throughout the years, all these countries that you named, Luxembourg especially, is known for having plentiful jobs, going back to the original things that are kind of being looked at, having plentiful jobs, and not only just plentiful jobs, but very high paying jobs as well. So it doesn't surprise me that Luxembourg is up there. And it goes to show that the overall things that are being looked at, the overall metrics that are being looked at to measure the quality of living of a country, they're kind of interrelated. And I think that's what's really interesting here because let's say plentiful jobs and quality of jobs are related to salary and income. And salary and income is related to also the purchasing power and how much that person can buy with that income that they're having. I think at the same time, and just to toss it back to you, there's a very interesting connection between purchasing power and the ability of these people to own homes. It's a very interesting statistic that you found that I do want to kind of loop this conversation right back at because I think it connects well with purchasing power before we go on into everything else. Because for everyone out there, every citizen out there, purchasing our home or housing is by far the biggest expense they'll ever have in their entire lives. So, and I want to pass it on to you in terms of the top 5 countries in this housing statistic that you have, which are there and which ones are related to the top 5 countries that have the best quality of living.
Yep. So I'm going to go over the rest of the data now. So
Yeah,
in terms, we're going to get to the cost of
yeah,
living and the property price, but healthcare index
yeah.
is something else you really did talk about and something I do want to touch on. So number 1 on the list, the Netherlands. They're top out of the top 5 countries renamed. They have the best healthcare system out of them. Number 2, Denmark. Number
Hmm.
3, Finland. 4, Luxembourg. Fifth, Iceland. And to me, I highlighted Iceland in the healthcare index because they're 40th internationally. So for one of the top five quality of life index countries, they fall in the middle of the pack when it comes to healthcare, but they do exceed in other categories. And I want to highlight the healthcare index first so people get kind of an idea of what's going to come. Cost of living. Iceland, number one. So they have the best cost of living, second overall internationally. Two, Denmark, fifth internationally. Third, Finland at 15th. Fourth, Luxembourg at 16th. Fifth, Netherlands at 18th. Property price to income ratio. So this is what you were talking about. So
Exactly.
basically, this is the income you make and how much you can afford a home. So the price of the home to the income the average family or household makes. Number one on the list, Iceland, sixth overall internationally. Number two, Denmark, eighth internationally. Three, the Netherlands, 10th internationally. Finland, fourth, 18th. Fifth, Luxembourg, 21st internationally. So again, top five countries, they're all pretty much, still within the top percentile of countries in each of the statistical categories we were talking about. And as you can see, Luxembourg has a high property price to the income ratio. It's more
Yes.
expensive to live in Luxembourg, and we see that through the price, the property price, and we see that through the cost of living. That yes, even though Luxembourg does, like you were saying, does have maybe pretty good income, does have good purchasing power, is a phenomenal country to live in, but it is very expensive to visit. And
Yep.
then two other categories I really do want to touch on before I give you back the microphone: traffic commute and safety, because those are two things you brought up at the beginning of your well, not the beginning, more towards the end of your monologue, that I just want to touch on when it comes to the quality of life. So traffic commute, Iceland number one, second overall internationally. So the distance between your home and your average commute to your grocery store, work, whatever it is, Iceland ranks in the top percentile at close to, if not the best country to travel to, well, have your daily commute. Number two, Netherlands, fifth overall. Number three, Finland, 10th overall internationally. Fourth, Luxembourg, 12th. Fifth, Denmark. So I want to highlight the traffic commute really quick. Iceland makes sense. Small communities, small distance to travel to. You're not going too far, like a global metropolitan area where maybe you live further outside the city to get to your daily commute in the city. If you look at Toronto, the famous joke here is basically everybody who works in Toronto doesn't live in Toronto. They all live about 45 minutes, an hour away from Toronto. So it just kind of goes to show how much a daily commute and traffic plays a role into the quality of life, especially when all you have to do is wake up and maybe your daily commute's 5-10 minutes, makes your life a little bit easier. And safety. So safety, Iceland, again, number one, 13th overall internationally. Two, Netherlands, 16th overall. Three, Denmark, 17th. Fourth, Finland, 18th. And fifth, Luxembourg at 33. So you can see a gap in the top four being so relatively close that they're almost interchangeable. But then Luxembourg trailing a little bit further behind in the safety category at 33. So the reason why I wanted to highlight these other categories before going back to you is because I want to relate it back to the healthcare, where Iceland was ranked 40th, right? And when we look at every other category following that, Iceland is first out of the top five countries when it comes to cost of living, property price to income ratio, traffic commute, and safety. So it goes to show you that even if you're leading in those three statistical categories, healthcare is still very valued, and purchasing power is still very valued. So I want to give you back the microphone and let you talk now after I just finished going on the statistical data front of Numbeo and my great research. Again, while you were
But
somewhere in Vegas on a racetrack, I was Googling some
but
information. So,
but listen, you're right, and I want to do highlight the point that you just made. Um, to be ranked as one of the top countries to live in, like the top countries, you do not have to rank first in everything. It's essentially kind of an average that they're getting at to see in terms of everything that the country offers, where do all these services rank? And as a general kind of package, where does the country rank? And that's what we're seeing. A lot of the countries, if you look at them that do rank in the top 10, right? Luxembourg, Netherlands, Iceland, Denmark, and Finland. All of these countries are ranked very, very, very highly in all of the major categories that are taken into account in terms of valuing the quality of life that a country gives. And it just goes to show that how somewhat accurate these statistics are. Although like quality of living is somewhat subjective, they are relatively accurate. They are relatively objective statistics. And I don't want to keep going on here. I do want to bring it back to where we live currently. Because yes, I can keep hammering away. I went to Vegas for 4 days, but I had to come back here. I had to come back to this beautiful, godly province of Quebec. And I want to bring it back to here. And I have just one question for you. Where does Canada rank on this list before we go into the individual provinces? The country of Canada, where does it fall?
So listen, before we kind of go into where Canada falls, I think just to test you a little bit further, so people have
Oh, oh,
kind of an idea or kind of a
Family
scale.
Feud round two, everybody.
Yeah. So the second question of Family Feud:
Yeah.
what are the five, or what do you believe are the five worst quality of life countries?
I mean, so let me ask this: do they take statistics of countries that are war stricken?
Look,
Like they have a lot of wars?
I'm not telling you. Just guess. Like, what do you
All
think
right.
this is? 20 questions with Joe? No,
Yes.
man. No,
Yes.
it's not. It's just give me your five countries, please.
All right. I'll definitely say there's some in South America, so Argentina should be in there. Brazil, I would tend to say. Definitely Bangladesh has to be up there. Like there has to be, it has to be. Like it's known for sweatshops and child labor. There's no way it has a good like quality of living. Um, what other places? I would say Nairobi, like Central Africa, Kenya, those five. Yeah.
No, no, you got one. You got
Okay.
one. So I'll give
Yeah.
you a slow clap, but you got one. So
Yeah.
Nigeria is number one. Number two is
Oh, there we go.
Bangladesh. Congratulations. Number three, Sri Lanka. Number four, Venezuela. Number five, Iran. Brazil and Argentina weren't even close to your guesses, by the
Okay.
way. So slow clap to you.
Very nice.
So Canada, where do we rank, or where does the
Yeah.
country rank in of itself?
Which is
Canada, Canada's 33rd overall on the list that has 85 countries.
okay. So
So
we're
it doesn't have.
roughly bam smack in the middle, give or take.
Yeah, to give the people an idea, we're in the middle of France, Latvia, Israel, Slovakia, and Cyprus.
Right.
So
Now,
just to give a generalized idea.
right. So now let me start my therapy session.
Oh
Now that
boy.
I'm back here. So obviously, Canada ranks about in the middle of the category in terms of the top countries that have the top quality of living. So now we want to kind of granularly go down and see the provinces within Canada. Where do they rank? Right. So you did a lot of research again because I was in Vegas. I was partying. Right. You did a lot of research on this. So obviously, question now that has to kind of follow up here to kind of see how good or how bad Quebec actually is. Where does Quebec rank in terms of quality of living within the provinces within Canada?
Like out of the legit provinces?
Out of all the provinces, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. There's a point that I'm trying to make.
Well, fourth.
Fourth.
Fourth
So
in
here's
all
what's
statistical categories, by the way, not just one here. It's going to be all statistical categories we're going to talk about.
right. So here's what's actually interesting with statistics, and we're going to get into kind of the reasons why Quebec, in my opinion, and I don't know if you share the same opinion as me, is one of the worst provinces out of the major provinces in Canada. So, as you said correctly, we're fourth, right? So it would tend to see, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not an opinion. It's a fact.
It's a
We
fact.
we are
It's-
we are the fourth worst province in all of Canada. It's not an opinion here. It's a legitimate
you're right.
fact by an
Exactly.
international report card. So
Exactly.
yes,
So here's the point. A lot of people will say that we're ranking fourth, which kind of puts us right bam smack in the middle of all the provinces in Canada. Almost right bam smack in the middle. But there's a fine little thing in statistics that we need to measure here. When comparing Quebec, right, which is somewhat of a major province, we need to compare apples to apples. We can't compare apples to cucumbers, right? We can't do that shit. So we cannot compare Quebec to Prince Edward Island, right? Obviously, he's going to rank higher, right? It's a bigger province. It has more economical uh, power than Prince Edward Island. It has more things to do, obviously. So you need to compare apples to apples, and this is kind of the point that you alluded to initially. Quebec ranks the worst out of all the major provinces in Canada. And what do I mean major? I'm talking the central economic hubs of Canada. Ontario, which is the financial capital with Toronto, right? Toronto is part of Ontario, the financial capital of Canada. BC, which also has a ridiculously strong financial sector, but also entertainment and shipping. A lot of shipping that happens in Canada goes right out of BC, right? And then also we compare it to Alberta, which is the energy capital of Canada. Out of all these major provinces, which Quebec, to give a bit of history here to the people that don't know, was the financial capital of Canada years and years ago, now ranks the worst out of these three. And to start with the statistics before letting you talk, because I am getting heated right now, right? I'm so heated, I am jumping in my chair. Just very quickly, Quebec's purchasing power for its citizens ranks below the general purchasing power of Canada. So let that sink in. Not only are we fourth, the worst of the bunch of the major provinces of Quebec, the purchasing power of the Quebec residents is less than the average of Canada. Need I say more?
no, and you gave all these other provinces great introductions. Ontario, financial province, Alberta,
Energy
natural
capital.
energy capital,
Yes.
Vancouver, port. Love it.
Yes.
Love the energy. Quebec language, maybe.
Exactly. There we go.
Dropout rate.
Exactly.
So,
And we're
yes.
gonna, yeah. And I think you bring up some very interesting facts there because you brought it up. Why is it that Quebec has such a low purchasing power?
Well,
Right.
yeah, it has to do with the dropout rate. We do rank number one amongst 20 to 24-year-olds that do not have a secondary education. And
Exactly.
again, like I understand maybe people are going to be like, well, they're pulling these numbers out of their ass. And again, I can't stress this enough. This was taken from a international report card. This is not just me saying it all willy nilly here. Yes,
Exactly.
for a province that prides itself on its education, it has one of the cheapest educations in all of Canada, and by a significant margin, mind you. But it seems like in cities like Montreal and Quebec City, where we do tend to have a lot, of higher ranked universities in Canada and internationally, in McGill and Université de Montréal, where we do have these high ranking universities, but it seems like a lot of adults in Quebec do not want to transition from high school to the CEGEP level, or I guess technically grades 14, 15 internationally, or high school. Here in Quebec, it's CEGEP. It's the gap between high school and university. Where people are failing to even get through high school.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, and you look where the province ranks, it's insane to see that
Yeah.
so many of these people are not finishing their education. And
Correct.
Again, there's no real data about which cities in Quebec uh, these people reside in, but you can make the assumption it's probably to do with more of the outer cities of Montreal, uh, which would be a fair assessment to make, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that was something I found really interesting on the report card when you look at it that way.
And it's actually something very interesting that leads into, and I'm taking a bit of a more serious tone here. It does lead into one of the reasons why we have such crooked, twisted, xenophobic politics in Quebec. So, usually speaking, when you have a highly uneducated populace, usually this population is easily swayed by politics, by extreme politics, by very charismatic leaders. And the thing is, these extreme politicians, especially in Quebec, that want separation, that force language laws onto companies, and this is where I'm getting at, are very charismatic. And this is a very nasty cycle, right? Because the people that don't have high school degrees, they don't have jobs that pay very well. And these politicians have managed to convince these people that the reason why they're not getting paid very well is not because they're uneducated, but because everybody else is speaking English. And they need to protect their language and their heritage because that's going to help them make more money, or that's going to help them have a better life. So what ends up happening is here in Quebec, if you really look at the electoral map, right, of the last elections, a lot of the votes that came in for the party that came out with Law 96, these language laws that are very restrictive for new businesses to open here, or for other foreign companies to open divisions here or departments here or anything, right? Because they need to have a French, they need to be completely rewrite all their manuals, all their advertisements in French. And it's an expense for them, which they don't want to do, right? All of this happened because these more rural areas, these more rural villages that are associated, you can make the assumption, are associated with higher levels of uneducation, voted for these parties. Now, before going into anything further, you're going to ask me, okay, so how bad is actually this? Like, why is this so bad? Well, it's simple. When a new company comes into a country and wants to open a division or do whatever, last thing it wants is to be forced to change its entire business process for a language. It's costly. There's a lot of friction for that company to start up in a new province. So what's ended up happening, and we've seen this, remember at the beginning when we started talking about Quebec, I said that Quebec used to be a financial hub, an enormous province, right, for all of Canada. But language laws, this absurdity with language laws that we have, has pushed all of these companies outside of Quebec. And that's the reason why today Toronto is such a thriving metropolis. It's got its own problems, but it's thriving. And why Quebec, on the other end, is dying. It's slowly but surely dying. So language laws can be to blame for that thing. And this this whole thing with language laws and with companies deciding to take their business elsewhere leads to the low purchasing power. Because what happens? Purchasing power is a factor of job opportunity. So if citizens who get degrees, and again, going back to what you said, we have the cheapest education system ever, right? Cheapest. So you come here, you can actually go to some of the greatest universities like McGill for very, very little money. But when you come out with a degree, there's no market for you to work at. There's none. Because the amount of companies that are able to operate in Montreal are very few. So when you have a surge in supply of labor, but the people who are demanding labor remains the same or decreases, well, I mean, the companies that are hiring get to decide what salaries they give. And that's why you're seeing on average salaries in Montreal are way lower than all the other major provinces.
See, and I wanna touch on this. So yeah, so since the 1970s, like you were saying, a lot of companies left the province because of that, because of the FLQ at the time. And for those
Yeah.
who don't know, Quebec history too much, as listening to this podcast internationally, FLQ was a group, political group that had power that wanted to separate the province of Quebec from the rest of Canada. at
Yeah.
that time. And since then, there's been referendums to have this done every so often. So
Yeah.
to go back to what you were saying, a lot of companies got scared because of how close that vote was. It wasn't a very, wide consensus of no. It was very close to 50-50.
Right.
And a lot of companies got scared and left. And the province has been paying that price ever since. Now, Theo, to answer the question that you said about, well, Montreal has one of the lower salaries, keep in mind for the longest time, at least up till 2020 and the pandemic and everything that's happened since then with the super inflation and all that, Montreal was also one of the cheaper cities to live in. You didn't
Yes.
need people to be making the same salary that they were making in Toronto because the everyday life, everyday goods and services was much cheaper than that of Toronto. To own a house and a property was cheaper than Toronto and cheaper than Vancouver. So people
Correct.
didn't need higher salaries. So that's just to answer that question that you asked. So I can forgive that. I can forgive that until obviously 2020 happened and super inflation and property prices going up by 20-30% from where they were in 2018, which is
Correct.
increased. Goods and services going up 10-20% from what they were in 2018. And granted, some of that's probably due to some shipping and all that, but that's a different subject for a completely different day.
Yeah.
But the one thing I do want to talk about is the tax margin. And the reason why I brought up not 20, 1970s is because when all these countries left, the government had very little to tax other than the people. And I
Yes.
bring this up now having this conversation because you alluded to salaries and how
Yes.
Montreal has one of the lowest salaries, but we also have we are
The
the
correct.
highest marginally taxed province in Canada at
Correct.
11.5%. That is up there with the likes of Greece, Hungary, and Chile amongst the
Yes.
G7 countries. That is abominable. And it's also the reason as to why a lot of Canadians even work into the ages of 60 to 64 and 65 to 69, that there's such a high demographic of of that population age group that's still in the workforce because of that cost of living that's skyrocketed, and people can't make those payments anymore, can't make their mortgage payments, can't make their everyday goods and service payment, can't do their grocery anymore. So
Correct.
I just wanted to bring that up and talk about it. That's my little rant of the day, and I know you're gonna keep going on that.
And
But
it's
that's
it yeah, and that's the thing, right? And going back to the major things that are looked at in terms of quality of living, right? Purchasing power is horrible in Quebec, right? You talked about, yes, before the 2020 pandemic and what we had and the surge in prices, we were one of the cheaper provinces. I agree. But that's not the case anymore. We're in 2024, prices have skyrocketed and salaries haven't moved because, again, there's no job openings here because the politics are pushing all these companies outside of the province. So you're starting to approach prices and costs of living which are similar to Toronto or British Columbia, right? But with a fraction of the actual salaries. And to add to that, what you correctly said, taxes. We're the most taxed. And I can already see some comments. I can already see some people saying, yes, but taxes are for the good of the people. And I would agree. But you haven't lived in Montreal. The taxes here, you would assume that the taxes that we pay would go into giving the citizens a better quality of living, better healthcare systems, better road networks, better all of that, correct? But in lovely old Quebec, not only do we have a xenophobic, language obsessed, stupid government, but we also have a fraudulent government, which is on par with some of the most fraudulent governments in the world, including my home country of Greece and maybe even Zimbabwe. So that's something to pride ourselves for. Because here's what's happening, right? So Quebec has an enormous history, like you correctly said, of taxing the living shit out of its citizens in order to essentially have major projects, to develop major projects which will benefit the livelihood of its citizens, only to cut these projects right before they're about to end, or to deliver them to the population half finished. And I'm going to give a couple of examples because before passing it to you, just so that people say that I'm not talking out of my ass here. The Olympic Stadium was one of it. With the Olympic Games that happened here, there were billions of dollars spent in building an Olympic stadium that, one, the roof structurally doesn't move anymore because it's in danger of actually falling apart, and also had structural failures within the Olympic stadium's like building that needed to be repaired. The second biggest one, the super hospital that we have in Montreal, had flooding issues due to sewage problems when it first opened. Even more millions and millions of dollars being funneled into that, which was supposed to be a perfect project. And finally, I'm going to talk about something that we had here called the REM. The REM, for those of you that don't know, is essentially a monorail, an exterior subway, a train system that connects the rural kind of outer areas of Montreal, areas like Laval, Blainville, and all of these areas which are outside of the city of Montreal, to Montreal with a very high-speed train network. So this project was in the works for the past 6 years, if not more, right? And what ended up happening, billions of dollars was siphoned in, billions of dollars were invested into the infrastructure and developing the system, only for it to be essentially half opened and the other half to be stopped because the government, only a couple of months ago in 2024, did an analysis and found that the entire REM system might be dangerous because the trains pass through neighborhoods where people live. So suddenly, this entire system that was there to help citizens and that citizens paid through abominable taxes is now canceled. Because now, after they siphoned billions of dollars into the project, now they decided it's a good time to do a safety check. Not before, now. And don't get me started on the roads. Don't get me started on the roads that they have worse roads than what, the Roman Empire had in like all those centuries back, right?
Uh,
Don't get me started on that.
Well, this is what I want to talk about. I want to go into a little bit more of the corruption of
Yeah.
the government side of it. So yeah, like you're alluding to the construction, right? So back in I think this was like 2007, 2008, the Charbonneau Commission, and
Correct.
the
Yeah.
massive fallout from that. So for those who don't know,
And I think this is important to highlight with the Charbonneau Commission. The Charbonneau Commission, you're going to get into it, was a corruption with a construction company, but not
yeah,
only just any construction company. It was SNC Lavalin,
yeah, one
which
of
is
the
one of the biggest in Quebec, and I think it's somewhat related to the government as well. It's a publicly traded
yeah,
major firm.
yep.
So just let that sink in.
So that's how the original Liberal government got pushed out of power back in '08, and which led to the PQ, which led to another Liberal government, which led to the PQ again. So it's a rise and fall type situation here.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, at least in the province of Quebec, the way the construction would work is that you would do bidding, and whoever has the lowest bid on a project, so you put your amount that you would need for the bid in an envelope, you submit it to the province, the government, and they choose basically the lowest one to take on as the contract. What we found out was that wasn't the case. And the Charbonneau Commission, or SLC Lavallee, they would be winning this based off the consensus that they weren't the cheapest construction, they were sometimes the most expensive, but would do it as if it was the cheapest. And we saw repercussions on that. If you look at the road system in Quebec, I mean, look, we celebrate potholes birthdays after years.
Yes.
Right? Mine's going on 4.
Exactly.
So to give people a little bit of an idea of that, and the Olympic Stadium, a massive project to build. The roof itself, it's been demolished and rebuilt so many times. It's been without a roof. It's been with a roof. It's been with a retractable roof. It's been with a foam roof. It's been with all these different types of roofs, and we're still unable to get it right. That even today in 2024, we're talking about another project on that roof. This is like 8-9 times. Most places you build a roof once, that should be it.
And you're done.
Should be it.
You're done.
It's 40 years, 50 years, and we're talking about different types. So to the point where most citizens, I think at this point, and most, tax-paying residents of Quebec are even debating whether or not the Olympic Stadium should just be there. And the government's only case to still have it there is, well, it's for the skyline of Montreal. And yeah, it's nice having the Olympic Stadium there, especially for myself that I'm down there quite a bit sometimes. for CF Montreal games and things like that. It is beautiful. It's a beautiful sight to see architecture wise, but damn, when you go inside, it's cold. And what I mean by cold is you can tell this thing was built and designed in the 50s and 60s. And when you look at the modernness of Montreal and where it's going and the historical point of view of the city, it doesn't add any value to that. Yeah, it might make the skyline look nicer seeing that tower, but at what point do you say it was what it was? It's time to move on. It's a bit of a hassle. And nobody's saying you can't rebuild it. It might be cheaper to rebuild the stadium than to consistently upgrade it and update it and update it. It feels like almost every 5 years it needs a new update.
Yeah.
And they gave out some ridiculous number of $3 billion to destroy the stadium, which I don't know about you, but Atlanta destroyed a stadium not too long ago. That was $8 million USD.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
again, I don't know where these factors come into price, but granted, going off a little bit of a tangent, but just to relate it back to the corruption and all that from the government. And I know you want to talk about healthcare, and I want to talk about
Yes.
healthcare too, just for a second before I let you go on to that.
Yeah.
You talked about, the
Super
the super
hospital.
hospital and the
Flooding of sewage.
sewage, right? I
Yeah.
want to talk about something else. That had 10 floors.
Yeah.
That super hospital, and it was designed to have a floor specific for every type of issue: ICUs, respiratory, brain, all that. And over the course of the last couple of years, they had to close down 2 floors of that hospital because of the shortage of doctors. And we talk about McGill University, that's renowned internationally for having doctors and medical students progress through, which we talk was one of the very high talking points of Quebec. And
Yeah.
we can't find doctors to fill those 2 floors.
Yeah.
So Theo,
Well, you bring something interesting, and before I start tackling my own say in terms of the healthcare system, I want to talk about a point that you just made right there. McGill, renowned for its healthcare program, right, and renowned for what it does in terms of educating doctors, is in Montreal, but yeah, Montreal can find doctors. Well, what you just explained right there is what is known globally as brain drain, where you have extremely educated people come out of one country and they leave for opportunities in another country. And I want to pull out this statistic. This statistic, my friend, is from the 2000s. So this is from 2000. This is 24 years ago. And there was a study done that shows that out migration, so people leaving Quebec, out migration of Quebecers from the province is more than 610,000 people every single year. And that's in 2000. We're in 2024. Things have gotten worse ever since then. So imagine the outmigration that's occurring in this province. And you might say, yeah, but we have immigration. But the problem is you have to see about what you're bringing in compared to what you're bringing out. So who is these people that are leaving from outmigration? Like you correctly pointed, Joseph, it's the doctors. It's the top financiers. It's the top engineers. It's the people that cannot find top quality paying jobs because there's so much negative politics that have pushed away so many good companies from opening up here, paying good salaries, and employing these people. So what's ended up happening is really Quebec is educating all these new people that are coming here for very cheap, and they're leaving, and it's all the other provinces, if not other countries, that are benefiting from this, not Quebec. But yet, our government is dead set on having people say bonjour before hello when you go to buy a coffee, because that is more important than losing all the intelligence and all the talent that you have from your province. And now I'll begin talking about the healthcare system, which is a fucking joke. So, and I've been through the healthcare system because I had an eczema problem a couple of years ago, a serious eczema problem on my body. So, just to give you an example, I went to a public healthcare clinic and saw a public healthcare doctor. Clearly, what I had was eczema. I knew it was eczema. My mom knew it was eczema. We're not doctors. I go to this doctor, and she tells me that it's bed bugs. Just let that sink in. Everyone that I talk to knows that this is eczema. She has a diagnosis that says it's bed bugs. What does that say about the quality of doctors? That they cannot even diagnose something that I can diagnose, let alone the fact that in order to get the way the healthcare system, for people that don't know here in Montreal, the way it works is before you go see a specialist, right? So, for example, for my eczema problem, before I went and saw a dermatologist, you need to see first kind of your family doctor, someone who would do an initial diagnosis, write a piece of paper, and say, yes, this person needs to go see a specialist. The wait time that you need to wait to see a family doctor in Quebec is 5 to 6 months, if not longer. So you can be suffering from something, need to see a specialist, but no, you have to wait 5 to 6 months because we don't have enough doctors. Why? Because the language politics that we have here and the shitty politics that we have here have pushed off all these job opportunities away, and all these doctors are walking away, right? Now, and if that's not enough, let's talk about the language 2 seconds. So you're an immigrant, right? You come here for the first time ever, you left your country for a better future. You don't speak a lick of French. You just don't. Okay? So what ends up happening? We have these twisted, stupid politics that say that when you come into this province, you are unable to receive service in English if it's a Quebec a Quebec governmental body that's offering the service. So think about this. You're an immigrant. You come here. You don't speak a lick of French, but you need to speak to someone in Quebec from a Quebec provincial organization, right? For a problem for a healthcare problem or for some paperwork that you need to do. And the person on the other end, when you answer and you start speaking to them in English, because you're an immigrant and you don't know French and you need help, can turn around and say, speak to me in French or else I don't serve you. And that's a fact. So what does that say about the province? What do you mean quality of living? First of all, we have a healthcare system which cannot help its citizens. In reality, if you want to get service quickly for a problem that you have, you need to go down a private clinic, which is astronomically more expensive, right? So essentially, right, we have a government that refuses to help its citizens through its governmental organizations if they don't speak French. And at the same time, its healthcare system is on par with the US's, which means you have to pay astronomical amounts to get quality service, but with an absolute fraction of the income you can make in the US and an astronomically higher tax rate than in the US. So in my opinion, with this little summary that I just done, honestly, I much be better off living in fucking Zimbabwe or Greece than in Quebec, because this place has turned into a dump. I don't know about you, Joe.
Well, for me, it's yeah, the province does have some problems, and I know you talked about quite a bit of them, or
Yeah.
all of them at this point. But for myself, it's like, we talked about other things that make this province great, or sorry, we haven't talked about those things that have made this province great. And that's something I do want to talk about before we just kind of end today's
Yeah,
conversation and this week's conversation on Uncut.
fair point.
you know, we talk about a province that at least tries to innovate itself, that has gone out of the way and invested in a public healthcare system. Granted, it's gone horribly, horribly wrong in that sentence, but they've done things that other provinces are trying to catch up on. Yes, we have a very poor healthcare system at the moment, but we have two state of the art hospitals that is waiting for that influx to come in, waiting for that doctors. And these things don't happen overnight. This could be a 10-year process. For a student to go through the educational process and be put into the system, it takes time. So you hope, in 10 years, you get to see that fruit of the labor kind of blossom and see how much the province has grown. You talk about the REM and we talk about transportation and commute and how much better, if it was done properly, how much better a commute would be for those people that live 45 minutes out of the city that do work downtown. And these are things that other provinces or other cities in the country are still trying to figure out. I talked about Toronto at the beginning of this podcast, how everything is an hour away from Toronto. Even Toronto is an hour away from Toronto. It's true because the commute in Toronto is so poor. Commute in Vancouver is so poor. Commute in Alberta is okay because Alberta doesn't have too many residents to begin with. But we talk about those things. Purchasing power, another thing that's going to take time to fix. And we're slowly seeing corporations that are in Quebec slowly starting to realize they can't keep operating the same way they operated in the 1960s, that they need to get with the times because of the workforce that's here. And we talked about dropout rates, and we said, oh, Quebec has a D ranking in that. It's true. We do have, between the ages of 20 and 24, we do have the highest dropout rate in Canada. It's very true. But we do have one of the best educational systems. And for those that do go on to go to university, we are ranked number 1 in all of Canada for people that graduate with a bachelor's, that graduate with a master's, that graduate with PhDs. And we do have the 2 highest ranking universities in one province that no other province can say. So, I know you shat on it.
I have a lot to contest, though, on the things that you just said.
You do. And like I said, there's good with the bad. You know what I mean? Like I said, we talked about the REM. You talked about the problems with the REM. Talked about the hospital. You talked about the problems with the hospital. Talk about the education. We've highlighted the bad about the education. The politics, well, I'll let you talk about the politics.
Well, the problem with all that you said, right, is I agree, right? But we're in this shitty state because of the politics that led us here. Yes. The purchasing power will fix itself, but we shouldn't be in a position where we're saying the purchasing power should fix itself.
Exactly.
We shouldn't be in that position. We shouldn't be in a position to say we do have state-of-the-art hospitals, but we're waiting for doctors to show up. We should be in the state where we say we have state-of-the-art hospitals and doctors to support us. This is all the gripes that I have and why I shit on this province. Because we do not need to be in a bad position to start turning around and saying that we're going to be hopeful one day it's going to fix itself. This is unacceptable from a first world country, in my opinion. And I have a very, very good idiom to highlight everything you just said in terms of this province trying to innovate itself, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that summarizes Quebec very well, in my opinion. Maybe they had good intentions, but they've paved it straight to hell.
But for whatever reason. But like I said too, right? It's gonna take time. So I agree with you. You shouldn't have to react to a problem. Exactly. COVID, what happened at COVID should have never happened in this province. We talked about not having enough beds, stressing the healthcare system, all these type of things. We shouldn't wait for a problem to occur. And that's the problem of the government. And not just this government, the government before this government. Because like I said, it's not something that one government is the reason for, other than the FLQ back in the 1970s. But what I'm just trying to say is, like, the fruits of the labor bear the womb, not in the moment, but in the following times. So it's not 2 years to fix, it's 10 years to fix.
If not longer.
If not longer. But a problem that should have been fixed or starting to be fixed
already
20 years ago. So it's catching up. So the mistakes from the past catch up to the future. That's all I'm trying to say. And you're right. Like you said, the REM, great idea, stupid execution. Whose problem is that? Well, like you said, it's been in construction for the last 8 years. You have to go back 2 governments, in the city. Hospital, great. It was cool when it was built, but when did this project start? 15, 20 years ago. Okay, well, this problem now. Well, how do you correct it? Well, look at what COVID did to the healthcare system. Well, that's not going to be fixed overnight because you need to find doctors. Well, how are you going to find doctors? Well, you have to have the education system. So, what are you going to do? What's the best solution? Well, you have the infrastructure to teach people how to be doctors. Now, you have to put things into places to want to keep these doctors in the province. And again, like I said, it takes time to get that education. So they're
Yep.
bringing in the students. We see that they're bringing in the students, but it's getting them to
But the
stay.
problem is, because there's no jobs, there's no good paying jobs, there's better jobs out there, and you have dumb politics. These students are taking the education and they're leaving.
And it wasn't even that long
Again,
ago. And just back to what you said, it wasn't even that long ago. It was 3-4 months ago where we just started having protests again about the healthcare system and
yes.
again about not paying nurses and professionals. But what does the province go do? So as all this is going on, they're willing to offer a stupid freaking hockey team $5 million from Los Angeles because of 2-3 francophone players to go play in Quebec City instead of
Yeah.
paying your freaking nurses who have been busting their balls off since the pandemic to make sure that everything is taken care of because you put the strain on the healthcare system. You can't even pay them the right pay.
Yep.
You can't pay the people the right pay. And this is again, I agree with you. I don't disagree with you when you say politics is the bane of the existence of this province. Because we see it. We talk about health, we talk about safety, all these type of things being the quality of life. And how many times in this province do we hear consistently, year after year, strike after strike? First, it's the police that have to go on strike. Then it's the healthcare system that has to go on strike. Then it's the fire that has to go on strike. It's the teachers that go on strike. It's, most
Then
part,
it's the people that are immigrants and don't speak French that have to go on strike. Like, I need basic services
it's the
and I can't get them.
construction.
Then
Construction
it's the
goes on
construction
strike.
workers.
But like, do you know what I mean? So it all comes back to your point of view, and we talked about it, the French language, and how this government never seems to have money to pay for, basic everyday quality of life things. But we somehow managed to find the money to pay people to go check restaurants to see if the signs are in French
In French.
or
Exactly.
predominantly French.
Exactly.
That we pay inspectors to go into manufacturers to make sure the inside of your dishwasher is labeled in French.
Correct.
That to me
It's
is the ripe of my conversation, is the ripe of my I guess rant here, to say the least. And like, we talk about Quebec quite a bit. So just to kind of wrap up this whole conversation today,
yes.
Theo, and all that. So we talked about Quebec quite a bit, and our struggles with where we reside, and wishing we lived somewhere else. Just ask the audience a question. What's something about where you currently reside that you have a gripe with? Because no place is perfect. No place is perfect. Even Asgard isn't perfect. To make the little reference to Marvel Cinematic Universe and Norwegian lore. Even Asgard wasn't perfect, right? You still had Ragnarok. So, like, just to ask, what's something about where you guys reside that you don't like, or that you need to rant about, or that you don't necessarily agree with? So, Theo, I'll leave it to you, and your closing thoughts.
Of course. I think you closed it off very well. And again, the same gripe with me. The gripe with Quebec is really its politics. This province could be amazing. It's a beautiful city to live in, right? But the politics are just weighing it down. And honestly, the politics are destroying it every single day that goes by. And at the end of the day, again, great question, audience out there. If you have a lot of gripes to pick with where you're living, feel free to share. We're always happy to interact with you. We're always happy to kind of learn about where you guys live, what problems you might have, what's good also in the places where you live. What are you most happy with in where you live? Share that as well. And as always, if you liked what you heard today, if you liked me ranting and blowing off some steam for the past 40 minutes, do share. If you think someone can gain from hearing us rant and talk, do share it with friends and family. And also, you can listen to us everywhere and anywhere: Google Play, Amazon Play, Spotify, anywhere that you can listen to a podcast, we are there. As always, those are my closing thoughts. My name is Theo, and I've been joined here by my lovely host, Joe. And as always, we hope to see you two in the next episode of Uncut. Take care.